All right, welcome back everybody for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at a video from Clif High.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Complex Knowledge Clif High Explorer's Guide to Sci-Fi World.
Okay.
So we're going to be talking about Clif's perspective on physics, consciousness, and reality.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Yeah, should be a fun one. Right out of the gate, Cliff starts talking about this difference between what he calls gritty physics and his ontological model.
Uh-huh.
Can you kind of unpack those terms for us a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I think when he talks about gritty physics, he's talking about that traditional physics of, breaking things down to the smallest possible, atom, quark, whatever you can get to, and then analyzing those pieces in isolation.
Okay.
Right. So very, very reductionist type of physics, which obviously has its value, but he's suggesting that maybe it's only looking at a very, very small part of the total picture.
So almost like taking apart a clock to see how it works.
Yeah.
He's saying that's not the whole picture.
Right, exactly. And it might not even be the foundational layer, right?
Okay.
He's suggesting that the material world that we see and touch and interact with might not be the base reality.
Okay.
It's more like a stage set.
Okay.
And that the real show is happening in consciousness.
So instead of like matter being the building block of everything, it's like consciousness that's actually pulling the string.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so that's a pretty wild idea.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads him to his main concept, which is this idea that the material world is actually a system for separating and isolating units of consciousness.
Yeah.
Why would the universe want to keep our consciousnesses apart?
Right. Well, he suggests that it has to do with generating novelty.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, think about if you were running a giant experiment.
Okay.
And you had all of these, units of consciousness, or let's call them participants in this experiment.
Right.
If you could isolate them from each other,
Right.
you could interdisplayed variations
Okay.
and then see what kind of results you get.
Yeah.
Right? So he's suggesting that maybe the whole purpose of this material world is to separate us so that we can have these unique experiences.
So we're all like little explorers in our own little worlds.
Yeah, you could think about it that way.
And we're all contributing to some kind of larger cosmic tapestry.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool. And it's through that lens that he starts talking about time and space.
Yeah.
He says that time and space are actually tools for creating that isolation.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, when you think about it, we spend so much time trying to like connect with others, right?
Yeah.
But if he's right, the universe itself is kind of working to keep us apart.
Yeah, it's like a giant cosmic game of hide and seek.
Right, right.
With reality.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, and so that concept of isolation is also really important for understanding how he differentiates between complicated and complex.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So complicated versus complex. How does he use those two words?
So he says that a complicated thing could be broken down into its individual parts.
Okay.
Right, so think of like a machine.
Right.
Right, you can break down a machine into all of its individual gears and springs and levers and understand how it works.
Okay.
But a complex system has properties that emerge from the interaction of its parts.
Right.
So it's not something that you can necessarily understand just by analyzing each piece in isolation.
So dissecting a frog would tell you how all of its organs work,
Right.
but it's not going to tell you how a frog interacts with its environment or how it catches flies or anything like that.
Exactly.
There's something more to it than just the sum of its parts.
That's right, yeah. He uses this analogy of the octopus.
Okay.
Like if you were to dissect an octopus,
Yeah.
you could see all of its parts.
Okay.
But that wouldn't tell you anything about how an octopus behaves in the wild, or how it changes color to blend in with its surroundings,
Right.
or how it thinks,
Okay.
So there's a level of complexity there that goes beyond just the sum of its parts.
Which makes me think of things like the placebo effect, right?
Yeah.
Where you have people who experience real benefits just because they believe that a treatment is going to work.
Absolutely.
So it's like their minds are influencing their bodies in a way that maybe science can't quite explain yet.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I think for Cliff, these types of phenomena suggest that there's more to reality than just the material world.
Right.
There's this interconnectedness.
Okay.
There's this layer of complexity that we're only beginning to grasp.
All right, so now for the wild part.
Yeah.
This is where Cliff's model gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because this is where he starts talking about psychic phenomena.
Psychic phenomena.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I'm sure a lot of people are curious about that.
Definitely, definitely. So how does Cliff explain, like, telepathy or precognition?
Well, this is where that concept of isolation comes back into play.
Okay.
Right. He suggests that the material world is designed to separate individual units of consciousness.
Right.
But that separation isn't perfect.
Okay, so it's like if you try to separate water into two compartments,
Yeah,
there's going to be some leakage.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so Cliff suggests that what we call psychic abilities
Okay.
are essentially glimpses into that underlying interconnectedness.
Hold on. So you're saying our minds are like leaky faucets?
Kind of, yeah.
Right.
Our consciousness is always kind of broadcasting on these slightly different frequencies,
Okay.
and sometimes those signals bleed through.
So like those random snips we pick up could be like little glimpses into the thoughts of other consciousnesses.
That's the idea.
Okay, that's pretty wild.
Yeah.
But isn't it a bit of a stretch to say that all psychic phenomena are just leakage?
Well, I mean, he's certainly presenting a pretty bold theory.
Right.
I think what's interesting is that he's not saying we should use those leaks to try to control or manipulate others.
Okay.
Instead, he's suggesting something much more profound.
Okay.
He's talking about harmonizing with larger forces.
Harmonizing with larger forces. What does that even mean?
So he believes that by understanding this model of reality, we can become more aware of
Okay.
and even align ourselves with these larger patterns of energy and information that are flowing through consciousness.
So it's almost like we can tune our own consciousness to resonate with these larger waves.
Yeah, it's like getting a power-up in a video game,
Right.
right? And if we can tap into those larger forces,
Yeah.
it could open up incredible possibilities for personal growth, creativity, even collective action.
Okay, that sounds amazing, but how do we even begin to perceive these larger waves?
Well, this is where things get a little tricky.
Yeah.
He talks about the importance of developing what he calls complex knowledge,
Okay.
right? And this is not just about accumulating facts.
Right.
It's about seeing patterns, connecting the dots, developing a deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of things.
So we need to like upgrade our mental operating systems to be able to even perceive this level of complexity.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
Wow.
It requires a shift in perspective, a willingness to question our assumptions, and a commitment to expanding our awareness.
So practices like meditation or mindfulness, would those be helpful for tuning into these larger waves?
They certainly could be, yeah.
Okay.
Anything that can help quiet the mind, cultivate inner stillness, enhance our awareness of our own thoughts and feelings.
So it's almost like we need to become more like theoretical physicists,
Mhm.
but instead of focusing on the grit, we're focusing on consciousness itself.
Right, exactly.
But remember, Cliff also cautioned against getting too caught up in that gritty approach.
You did, yeah.
So how do we balance those two seemingly contradictory perspectives?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
It's like we need both the map and the compass.
Okay.
Science gives us this detailed map of the terrain,
Right.
but we also need the compass to guide us in the right direction,
I like that.
right? And I think a lot of people struggle with that.
Definitely.
On the one hand, science is telling us the material world is all there is.
Right.
But then we had this intuitive sense that maybe consciousness is the foundation of everything.
Yeah, how do we bridge that gap?
Well, that's the great mystery, and I don't think anyone has all the answers.
Right.
But what I find compelling about Cliff's perspective is that he doesn't ask us to reject science.
Okay.
He invites us to see science as part of a larger, more complex tapestry.
So instead of seeing science and spirituality as being at odds with each other, maybe they're just different sides of the same coin.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think as we continue to explore both sides of that coin,
Yeah.
we'll discover that they're ultimately pointing us in the same direction.
Right. Okay.
But let's bring this back down to earth for a moment.
Yeah.
How can our listener start to integrate these ideas into their everyday life?
It all sounds pretty abstract and theoretical.
It does, yeah.
Right. Like resonating with cosmic forces. What does that even look like in practice?
I think it starts with awareness.
Oh.
Just being mindful of the fact that there's more to reality than meets the eye.
Right.
That our consciousness is interconnected with something larger
Yeah.
that can have a profound impact on how we perceive the world and interact with others.
Well, instead of seeing ourselves as isolated individuals, we start to recognize the interconnectedness of everything.
That's it.
Okay.
And with that shift in perspective comes a sense of responsibility.
Okay.
If we're all part of this interconnected web,
Yeah.
then our thoughts, our actions, our intentions all have ripple effects.
It's like we're all connected by these invisible threads, and every action we take sends a vibration through that web.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
He talks about the importance of right action,
Okay.
making choices that are in harmony with these larger forces,
Right.
choices that contribute to the overall well-being of the system.
So kind of like the butterfly effect.
It's all connected, yeah.
Okay.
And this principle of right action can be applied to every area of our lives. Relationships, work, choices as consumers, citizens.
Right.
It's about asking ourselves, how can I use my unique gifts and talents to contribute to the greater good?
Okay.
How can I align my actions with the flow of consciousness?
That's a good question for our listener to think about.
It is.
But how do we know if we're on the right track?
Well, I believe there are signs,
Okay.
but they're often subtle and often personal.
Okay.
It might feel like a sense of flow, a feeling of being in the right place at the right time,
Right.
a knowing that your efforts are being supported by something larger than yourself.
It's like tapping into a source of energy and inspiration that's always available. But we just kind of block it with our own limiting beliefs or fears or whatever.
Right.
But something tells me that Cliff wouldn't be a fan of blind faith or just following someone else's dogma.
No, you're absolutely right.
Right.
He encourages us to question, to think critically,
Yeah.
to develop our own understanding.
Remember, he was pretty critical of those physicists, right?
Well,
Like Eric Weinstein, who he felt were too focused on the grit, the material details.
he called them out by name.
Yeah, it seems like he had a bone to pick with some of the more traditional scientific approaches.
He definitely wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
He saw their focus on the material world as a limitation,
Okay.
almost like they were missing half of the equation.
So it's not about rejecting science altogether, but it's about expanding our view to include the realm of consciousness as well.
Precisely.
Okay, so that brings us back to that fundamental question.
Yeah.
If the material world is just a construct for isolating consciousness,
Yeah.
what happens when the experiment is over? What does that mean for the future? That's a question that really gets the imagination going, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Like if this material world is just a temporary setup, what happens next? What's the grand finale?
Well, he doesn't give any specific predictions in this video,
Okay, okay.
but he does suggest that we're moving towards a period of increased complexity.
Oh, okay.
So think about it. Technology is accelerating,
Right.
information is exploding.
Yeah.
The interconnectedness of our world is becoming more and more apparent.
So instead of things simplifying, they're actually getting more intricate and intertwined.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of what we're often told about.
Yeah.
Reaching a point of singularity where everything kind of merges into one.
Right, right.
This is a different perspective.
Yeah.
It might be a bit more challenging to navigate,
Okay.
but it could also be incredibly exciting.
Okay.
And if he's right, the skills that we've been talking about, developing complex knowledge, tuning into these larger waves,
Right.
aligning ourselves with these forces,
Right.
these become even more crucial.
So how do we as individuals prepare for this shift toward greater complexity?
It's easy to feel overwhelmed just thinking about it.
Yeah.
I think one of the most important things we can do is cultivate flexibility and adaptability. Okay? If the only constant is change,
Yeah.
then being able to adjust to new information, unexpected circumstances,
Right.
that becomes a superpower.
So it's like learning to surf.
Yeah.
You can't control the waves, but you can learn to ride them.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. I remember what he said about harmonizing with those larger forces.
Yeah.
As the complexity increases,
Okay.
so does the potential power of those waves.
Right.
Learning to align ourselves with them,
Yeah.
that could make all the difference.
So it's not about resisting change. It's
Yeah.
about learning to dance with it.
Beautifully put, yeah.
Right.
And this dance might lead us to some truly mind-bending possibilities.
Oh, okay.
He gets at the idea that as we evolve,
Yeah.
our very understanding of consciousness might change.
Okay.
What we currently perceive as separate units of consciousness
Right.
could eventually merge into something far more unified and expansive.
So it's like we're all individual drops of water in the ocean.
Mhm.
But eventually we might realize that we're all part of the same vast, interconnected ocean of consciousness.
Yeah. It's a profound and awe-inspiring concept, isn't it?
It really is.
And it speaks to the immense potential that lies within each of us.
This whole deep dive has been a wild ride.
It has.
Cliff's ideas are definitely thought-provoking, even if they might seem a little out there to some people.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I have to admit, I'm still grappling with this idea that the material world is just a temporary construct.
Yeah.
If that's the case, what's the purpose of it all? What happens when the experiment is over?
That's a question each of us has to ponder for ourselves.
Right.
But perhaps the journey itself is the point.
Okay.
Maybe it's about the experiences we have,
Yeah.
the connections we make,
Right.
the growth we undergo
Yeah.
as we navigate this temporary reality.
And maybe, just maybe, like Cliff suggests, it's about generating novelty, exploring new possibilities, and expanding the very definition of what it means to be conscious.
You nailed it.
All right, well, folks, we've reached the end of our deep dive into Clif High's unique perspective.
Yeah.
Remember, this is just one way of looking at reality,
Mm-hmm.
but hopefully it's given you some food for thought,
Yeah,
some new ideas to play with,
definitely.
and perhaps even a sense of wonder about the nature of your own existence.
Exactly.
So keep
Keep
questioning, keep
exploring.
expanding your awareness.
Who knows what amazing discoveries await you on your journey?
Until next time, keep diving deep.